Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for a new episode of A New Go of New Home Sales. I'm your host, Anya Chrysanthon, and joining me today is Genevieve Benson, who is a Director of Strategic Partnerships with Milesbrand. So welcome to the show, Genevieve. I'm so excited that we are finally meeting here today.
Me too, Anya. It's an honor to be on with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Genevieve, as always, I'd like to kick things off by telling our listeners your life story. So, give us a rundown of who you are and how did you get into home building industry?
All right. Well, that's a great question. And I feel like it started my attraction to kind of how we react to space and to beauty and to architecture. It started at a young age for me. I saw how important it was to have spaces that were really intentionally crafted and how that affected people and relationships and ability for people to connect in those spaces. And so from an early age, I actually wanted to get into interior design. So that's what I went to school for. And when I graduated in '09, it was, as you know, a very difficult time for our industry. There wasn't a ton of opportunities for a new graduate in interior design. So I ended up going into working at a nonprofit focused on community development. So we worked on activating downtown communities in rural parts of Colorado. So sort of industry adjacent. And then, I wanted to make a switch and I was introduced to a commercial landscaping company that focused on working with builders and developers on new communities. And so that's really my first introduction to the new home industry as we know it today. And I did sales for them in their commercial department. So built relationships with builders and developers, really loved the industry and the people, but wanted to get back to more creative roots. And heard Dave Miles speaking at a local HBA event and thought, wow, I'd really like to meet with him and learn more about Milesbrand. And now, gosh, it's 8 years later, and they're not going to get rid of me anytime soon. And I love what I do. We're focused on the new home industry exclusively. We're a brand and marketing consultancy. We work with privately held builders, really differentiating themselves and then also bringing new mixed use and master plan communities to market. So that kind of brings us all the way up to where we are currently, where we are today.
Awesome. So you and I have talked a little bit ahead of time, and of course, we talked about branding because branding is something that you guys do really well at Miles Brand. Right now, it's kind of a tough market. It's all over the spectrum, right? You talk to some builders and they're like, we're killing it and we're ahead of our goal for this year. And you hear some people are being laid off and things are really not going as well as they are hoping. So for maybe regional and private builders who don't necessarily have the funds to compete on financing, but some of the larger nationals, what are some of the most effective ways that they can differentiate themselves on brand?
I think it's a really strong opportunity right now for private builders and regional builders to stand out from the crowd. We know from buyer sentiment surveys, we recently saw an update from Kantar about people really losing confidence in institutional brands and large brands. They want to be spoken to with an authentic voice. They want to align with brands that feel true to their values. They want to align with brands that have a personality and tone of voice that's appropriate with the times. We're not always looking for that polished and perfect message. We're looking for something that's emotionally resident to us. This is the most significant purchase that people make. How can we cut through the clutter and speak to them in a language that they're going to understand that shows some empathy? Because people are dealing with a ton of uncertainty right now. So I think it's really important first for builders to take a look at why are buyers sitting on the sidelines? There are some really significant reasons for that. And instead of brushing it over and saying, oh, everything's perfect and here's the perfect solution for you, I think it's meeting them where they are and speaking to them in a language that says, we get times are uncertain, but we've been doing this for a long time. This is how we create a really successful journey for our buyers to get you from point A to point B to where you're moving into your home of your dreams, or even just it's not always a home of your dreams. I think that's another part of messaging right now. We've so focused on that American dream messaging for so long. And sometimes people are purchasing a home because they got a divorce or they needed to move or they're taking care of a sick parent and they need to have space for them in their home. So I think finding a unique brand voice and meeting where buyers really where they are today is a powerful opportunity for private and regional builders. And what does that look like? That looks like leveraging authentic stories. So your buyer stories, using more imagery that feels true and authentic, not just going to a stock library and choosing photos that look like everybody else. It's finding that white space in your industry or in your market and saying, this is our opportunity to speak about our process and why we're different and why we can offer something to buyers that builds trust. That's so important right now when people are so uncertain. Is brand your brand needs to build trust.
Mhm. And when you talk about building trust and specifically through brand, I know many people, when they hear word brand, they still think like a logo, right? They think like it's a one thing you do in the beginning. You meet with an agency, they come up with the creative for you, boom, you're set. But really, when we talk about brand, we mean the entire customer journey and
Yes.
how you can infuse your brand into that customer journey. So can you talk us through kind of how can builders really map out this customer journey to make it feel more intentional and really exciting at every touch point?
That's a great question, Anya. And I think the first step is putting yourself in your buyer's shoes and getting the leaders from all the different departments. So, your construction department, your sales, your marketing, warranty, anyone who touches that customer, getting them around a table and really mapping it out. We're still finding a lot of builders that haven't mapped their customer journey. So, step one is map that out from first click to the closing, but also what does that warranty process look like? How can we think about the buyer journey as more of a life journey in a circle? We don't want them to leave. We want them to be referrals for us in the future. We want them to be repeat buyers. So, looking at all the different touch points and looking at how your brand shows up in all those touch points. Are you speaking about yourself in a way that's consistent, both in digital, traditional media? How's the sales experience, the warranty experience? Is it all laddering up to your core value, whether it's your USP or your brand promise or tagline? You need a North Star for your brand. And getting that established North Star really helps you start to measure up, are we communicating consistently? And are we doing more than just communicating? Do we have actions that back that up? And do our team members know what it looks like to live up to that brand promise? And I like to use famous examples because I think it's easy for people. You think about Nike, just do it, Apple, think different, Target, expect more, pay less. You want to come up with that succinct phrase that sets the foundation for all creative and messaging moving forward. And then you can tie action. So showing sales, what does it mean to live up to, think different or just do it or whatever your brand promise is?
Yeah. So how can you tie that storytelling? Because you talked about storytelling, especially for those regional builders, right? So how can we tie that storytelling from all the points from a website when people first land on it to maybe like when people come into your sales center? Because again, sometimes there's such a big disconnect, right? Like it's, people visit us on our website and then they go to a sales center and it's like, is this even the same company? And
Yeah.
then even post close, that is still story of your brand. So how can we really make sure that we are telling the same story consistently throughout that? Because oftentimes it's disconnected for the customers, but internally we're not always on the same page as builders, as we all know.
Yes, yes. Well, and it's hard. Everybody's really focused on the task at hand, what their department is really responsible for, and it's easy to get siloed and not realize where the disconnects are. So step one would be that auditing process. Does that mean you do some kind of a secret shop? Does it mean that you consult with an agency? That's certainly one way to do it. You could task a few of team members to really look at it critically. If you don't have the budget to work with somebody outside, that's certainly another option to really make sure that you're expressing your brand and living your brand in a consistent manner across all customer touch points. we see a powerful tool that is being used by many of the builders we're working with. It's a brand guide. And I sometimes call it the brand Bible because it should have everything in there. This isn't just your graphic standards and how you're showing up visually. This is how your personality, your tone of voice, these are words we like, these are words we don't like. And then you break it down by department. And this is a training tool. And you say, okay, in marketing, these are our social media guidelines. This is how we want to represent ourselves. This is how photography should be shown. These are the types of imagery that we want to focus on. And this is the type of imagery we don't want to focus on and the reasons why. People need to understand deeper than just like, this is the pretty picture we want to go with. Sales, same thing, giving them, not that we want anything to feel scripted by any means, but some examples of what it looks like to speak in your brand voice, I think is a really powerful tool for sales teams. And then people can fold that in and make it more natural to their own personality and tone of voice. But I think you need that employee buy-in too. They're just as much an expression of the brand as what your website is or the way you're presenting your sales center and your model homes.
Yeah.
They need to be trained and set up for success so that they can accurately represent your brand. And if you don't have a foundation for them to understand a brand promise, mission, vision, values, if you don't have that groundwork there, they're going to just kind of make it up. And that's when you start to see the disconnect and inconsistencies. And it's hard too with regional builders if you don't have really clear guidelines. Each different market is going to perhaps have different marketing people working on things, and it can get diluted. And then suddenly your messaging starts to erode. And then people are saying, wait, am I seeing the same builder that I saw yesterday? They don't always pinpoint it exactly, but they know that it doesn't feel like a consistent experience. And the last thing that any of us can afford to do right now is introduce confusion or erode trust with our buyers.
Yeah. And you're so right that these points of brand dissociation can come at any time. I just personally had an experience with the brand. I rented a car when we were on vacation, and there was an issue where I was charged some extra fee when I returned the car. Apparently, I didn't return in the right location or something was going on. And I had reached out, and my experience was just such a bad experience with the
Ah,
customer service that I was
mhm.
like, wow, like I love this brand and this is like how you guys are treating me now. It's just unreal. And then it made me think about some of the issues that I previously had with some of my favorite brands like Marriott and Rent a Runway. Like Rent a Runway, I love that brand. I talk about them all the time. And the couple of times that I had kind of a customer hiccup thing where like
Mhm.
something wasn't right or something wasn't what I expected, and I had reached out to them, as a consumer, whether you're on the phone or texting with the customer support people, you always have that level of anxiety rising inside of you. Like, right, are they going to do right by me or are
Yeah.
they going to like treat me badly? And
Hmm.
so when I reach out to Rent a Runway, it is such a pleasure of an experience. Now I know when I reach out to them, like they're going to take care of me. Like I know they're going to be amazing. Same thing with Marriott. And now this car company, I was like, wow, that tells me a lot. I will never rent from them again, even though I had a great experience with them up until that point, right? And that kind of overshadows that whole entire experience. So, thinking about customer journey in home building, are there big friction points that you can pinpoint through your work with all the builders that you commonly see that is typically a spot where you have to be really vigilant because that's where usually those friction points can really arise and take your whole customer journey on a left hand turn, even though you may have done everything right up until this point.
Yeah, I think there's a couple primary points that we see over and over again. And a lot of times it has to do with the brand not being clearly identified or there's a training issue. So let's say builder A has beautiful branding, they have great messaging, everything has been really intentionally crafted up to the point where someone is going in and actually meeting with a sales agent on site and they're going to tour the model home. Maybe there isn't as much training on that side of things, or you have a new salesperson. You can't predict they're a human being. Sometimes they do a great job, maybe sometimes they don't. So there can be inconsistencies And I just think it's really important to be aware of those and to make sure that the transition between online, your OSC, and then your on-site salesperson is really smooth. And a lot of times it's not a fault of the salesperson. They need transparency into what that buyer has already shared with maybe the OSC or during their journey. So it has to do with what kind of digital tools do you have in place to track that customer journey? What home plans have they been looking at? So that they are not starting from ground zero, trying to catch that salesperson up on what they feel like, gosh, don't you already know this about me? I've already interacted with your brand multiple times. So that's
Right.
not on the fault of the salesperson. That's just making sure that that salesperson has transparency and has time to research that particular buyer before they get there so that it really sets that engagement up for success and it makes that person feel like, wow, they've been seeing me, they've been following my journey, they care, and I'm
Yeah.
not having to reiterate myself. So I think that's a key area. And then, similar to your experience with the car, what is the experience like when somebody gets to warranty, when something goes wrong with their brand new house that they're so excited about and that they love and they've just spent a lot of money on, and it might have stirred up some financial anxiety and then something goes wrong?
Yeah.
If
Yeah. I think
that
you're so
interaction
right.
isn't good, it that does not leave people with a good taste in their mouth and they're not going to want to refer you. And they may
Yeah.
start second guessing their decision to work with you in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. That's exactly it. As a customer, you can relate to that first scenario of like, I already told you. It's when you're getting passed around to
Yeah.
next customer representative,
Yes.
they fail to tell the next customer representative what's been done, right? It's like,
Mhm.
as a customer, it's just so frustrating, especially now as with AI and all these tools, consumers are exposed to all the other shopping opportunities
Yes.
and they see what's possible. So when they get to shopping to home builders, they expect the same kind of level of experience that they're getting elsewhere. And so, yeah, if you're making them repeat themselves over and over again, it's just like, oh, it's a killer. I think, especially once we hand off things from sales to production, that is when a lot of things tend to happen. Because it's, I mean, number one, a lot of times we neglect to even train our field people, right? Like we do so much training in sales, and it's always like,
Mhm.
oh, your customer and how you treat the customer. But how many builders are actually training their production team
Yes.
in customer support and how you should be handling situations? And oftentimes, those guys are not exactly super advanced in the softer skills, let's just say that. Not to stereotype, but a lot of times that is the case. And if they get neglected, it could really compound, right? If they're not communicating constantly to the customer with updates and they're not handling their questions correctly, they're not getting back to them,
Yes.
it can create like a really, really bad experience, even though they were maybe perfectly happy going up to the sale. So yeah, I would strongly recommend. I think you're right that technology has evolved so much and there's so many great solutions now available there so that you can really lean on technology to help you in that, whether it's how you're handing it off from website to your sales, or once construction starts, how you're keeping customer in the loop, and then of course with warranty. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we cannot talk about branding without your customer avatar. And builders say they want to know their buyers better.
Mhm.
So, what data should they actually be collecting and actually using when they're creating a customer persona?
I think so many of our builders have a ton of data
Hmm.
and they have it, but they're not leveraging it. So they go through and they check the box of we're sending out buyer surveys, and maybe they even send a couple during the entire customer journey. Now, with AI, the power of that is how do we extrapolate that data quickly, find patterns? We have the ability to do that in a way that we haven't ever at a speed without having to leverage maybe really expensive data solutions. So it's looking at what do you have in place if you don't have customer surveys or lost buyer surveys in place. Those are things that I think are important. And we do have really strong market research firms that specialize in our industry. You can tap their shoulder if it's something that you have a need for. They can really help you dig into the why and the psychographics of that buyer persona, because we always say at Milesbrand, people don't just buy a product, they buy a version of themselves that exists within your story. So,
Yeah.
how are you painting that picture and meeting them where they are? And oftentimes, builders have multiple buyer personas, and you need to make sure that each one of them is reflected in your marketing in different ways so that people can see themselves. And it's not always just the nuclear family, it's not always just a couple with a dog. It's like there's all sorts of different ways that people are connecting in our communities and living in our homes. And we need to have that in-depth understanding of who are our buyers and why are they buying, and their reasons is where you can start to tug out stories that are going to resonate on an emotional level. And then you're not just going to market with listing features and saying you're a quality builder, because that's what everybody is doing.
And you're right. Now, again, going to technology, we do have so much technology available. If you have a community that's coming, getting that on your website sooner than later, for example, and starting to collect data on who's visiting your website, what are they looking at, which home sites are they clicking on, even if you don't have pricing yet, if you have interactive maps on your website and if you have floor plans, that will give you great information where it's like not only who's coming there, but what is actually trending and what's popular, right? So, actually, speaking of psychographics, how can builders pair psychographics with product data for stronger messaging?
So I think just what you were sort of saying, like where are people spending time? What floor plans are resonating? What elevations are resonating with them? And then understanding who are those people? What do we know about them? What have they shared with us so far? And again, if you need to dig in with a market research firm, there's many that specialize. You have Kantar, who really is more into behavioral buyer sentiment right now. They're a national leader in that space, but you have partners like Zonda or John Burns that can help you as well. And they can even do that lost buyer survey. So, why didn't they buy with you? Maybe your product, you came up with a new product and it's not resonating or landing, and you're not sure why. Find
Mhm.
out why people didn't buy with you. And then it's perhaps time to look at what are we putting out there? And how do you pair that with messaging? Again, I think you can start to extrapolate and find patterns leveraging AI to bring some of those human stories to life. So let's say a 4-bedroom home is really performing well. You can build it for an affordable price in a certain market that you're looking at. Okay, who are our regular buyers? Who keeps buying from us? And then how can we start to pull their true resident stories into our marketing? We did this with the master plan community actually down in Naples, Florida, featuring real resident stories. So the entire campaign is real stories. And Ave Maria, their brand promise, is a big kind of small town. So we showed all these different buyer personas, real people that live in the community, and how they're enjoying living there and how they're finding connection and enjoying that type of lifestyle. And we followed a kid around. So it was really fun. Her name was Sarah. We had an active adult who started her own golf league after she lost her husband. There was a multi-generational family that ended up all moving to the community. So I think you really can find powerful storytelling leveraging your buyer stories, and it's fairly inexpensive way to bring some of that to life, and people will connect with that. It feels authentic. It feels like I can see myself in this family, or I can see myself in this woman who's buying her first home.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great idea. I remember sitting at the Nationals this past year and seeing some of these awards and couple things that people were doing. I thought it was so neat. Like somebody had a whole weekly YouTube show that they were doing about their community and just such a creative ways to bring people behind the scenes of what's
Yeah.
really going on in that community, who really lives there, the stories that they're telling. So I thought that was really great. So it's kind of similar to what you're saying here. Show real people. Like,
Yes, yes.
as long as you have happy customers, right? That's
That's very true. That's very true.
That's the thing. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, okay, maybe I should revisit branding, how do you know when it's time to do a little refresh versus when do you actually need to do full rebrand?
It's a great question. I think when you're looking at a simple reskin, you have a strong foundation in place. Your team understands your brand, understands your values, the market understands it, but maybe the visual identity is dated. The
Mhm.
colors aren't resonating anymore. The imagery isn't cutting through the clutter now. It's just time to update things. Maybe you've been using some of the same lifestyle imagery for a while. Maybe the product needs to be reshot. Maybe you need to restyle your model homes because decor has fallen out of favor. That's when we would consider more of a brand reskin when it's really the foundation is strong and it's just the aesthetics that need a facelift.
Yeah.
When you really need to look at, okay, we need to reposition ourselves, is if you look at your marketplace and everybody's making the same promises, you look and sound, it feels very transactional, your language, and you're not really telling any emotional stories that are connecting with your buyers. That's when it's time to reflect and say, okay, we need to come up with a brand promise or a USP that reflects who we are today. Sometimes builders, they start moving into different markets or they move into selling a different type of product. Maybe they go up and more to a luxury builder and they still have a brand that was when they were speaking to a first-time home buyer. So there's a disconnect there. And that's fine, but that's a time where you really need to say, okay, we need to revisit our whole brand because it's not speaking to the type of buyers that we want to attract now that's aligned with our business goals and strategies. And that's when a deeper dive is needed.
Yeah. And you've already touched on this a little bit, but what are some of the most powerful ways that somebody can refresh their brand without breaking a bank?
Doing a competitor audit, look at what your brand in its entirety. What are you promising? How are you speaking to your buyers? Are you listing features and only leading with incentives? Or do you have some story, some personality, a tone of voice? And
Mhm.
then look at the other competitors in your marketplace. The easiest thing that you can do is look for the white space. Look for an opportunity to look and sound different, have a unique point of view. I think Garmin Homes is a great example of this. They have a really fun personality, a great emotionally charged brand. I love it. I always love seeing what they come out with. True Homes out of the Carolinas, they're a client of ours. They are another one. They wanted to be the most consumer centric builder in their market, and they positioned their brand promise back in 2006 of it's all about you, and everything ladders up to that. And they're not afraid to look and sound different. Same with Garmin. It's like, let's not swim in the sea of sameness. Let's be bold. Let's connect with people. Let's have fun. People are ready for that. They're looking for brands that challenge the status quo, that are creative, that have a personality, that maybe aren't as PC anymore. I think people are ready
Yeah.
for some fun and some energy. Like
Yeah.
life is too hard right now. We all get it. Like it's rough out there. Let's bring some joy to an experience where people are stressed out. They are really emotionally charged. Even if they're excited, it's still stressful. So let's bring some joy.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Garmin Homes. I love following them on social. They're one of our clients. So watching them, sometimes I find myself on Friday, Saturday, just like scrolling
Yes.
social and be like watching, binge watching their stuff. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, yeah, I'm stalking them, but it's so binge worthy. The content that they're putting out there, it's just, yeah, it's different. It's unique. So Genevieve, what would you recommend to a builder who's maybe listening to this and they're like, okay, we've seen Garmin Homes and they have very strong voice and
Mhm.
stance. And maybe they're afraid that they're going to offend some people if they take up similar voice. What's your position on that?
That's a fair position to have. You have to be authentic to who you are as an organization. It doesn't make sense to copy what somebody else is doing. People see through that, and your employees will see through that. It's not going to translate well for you. So I think it's finding your unique voice. And if that's not your organization's identity, that's okay. But my challenge would be to that builder is to find some unique voice or find a way to communicate what do you really bring to the table for a buyer? What differentiates you from builder X over here and builder Y over here? Why would they go with you versus somebody else? And I
Mhm.
think it needs to be a lot of different reasons. And I think your customer journey needs to infuse moments of joy where it might feel monotonous and it doesn't have to be expensive. There's tons of ideas out there. Borrow from hospitality, look at
Mhm.
retail, find some ways to infuse joy and get your team members in on it. I think that's a great way to just start thinking about your branding and your positioning in a way that maybe you haven't before. And it doesn't necessarily require you to enlist the help of an outside agency if that's not in the budget right now.
Yeah. So when you work with home builders, how do you even guide them to find their brand voice? Is it something that comes from the team? Is it usually internal? Because I can imagine that it has to align with your values, right? Like if you guys can suggest whatever brand you're going to suggest, but if it doesn't align with them, it doesn't align with them. So what's the best way to kind of like extrapolate, like what are your values? What's important for you? Like what do you want to represent? Is there a
Yeah.
good exercise for that?
There is. So we start every new engagement with what we call our brand charrette. And what that essentially is a discovery session. It's an exercise meant to really dig into four key areas that help to uncover that brand DNA. So,
Mhm.
your organizational identity, your mission, vision, values. If those things aren't defined, we help with that before. Then, what are the products that you're building? So, what types of homes are you building? What types
Mhm.
of markets are you serving? And then, who are you building for? So, who are your buyers? What are your buyer personas?
Mhm.
And then finally, who is the competition? How are they presenting themselves? How are they talking about themselves? And how do you differentiate from them?
Yeah.
From there, we start to extrapolate the unique brand DNA because we start to say, okay, we want to base it on the organizational identity, what you do, what you bring to the market, who you serve, and who's the competition so we can position them against that. And then we will help them craft that brand promise, which is that tagline that everything must ladder up to. So that brand promise of it's all about you or think Apple, think different, whatever that is,
Right.
that really helps. Another tool, depending on how in depth the builder wants to go, is looking at previous buyers and asking them and doing buyer surveys. And sometimes builders already have this, but why did you choose to buy a home with this particular builder? What was your experience like? And then looking at different vendor partners. It's a great way to understand more about yourself and your brand to ask also others. So, yes, it's an internal exercise, but if you can ask maybe your landscaping company or your interiors company, your merchandising company, what is it like to work with us as an organization? Why do you like working with our team? I think a lot of insights can be gained from that. And again, that all is considered when we are trying to come up with that unique positioning statement for that builder.
Yeah, for sure. So building a brand is not as easy, right? It's not just like picking pretty colors and this and that. It's kind of like you have to really self-reflect and
Yes.
make sure that the team is on the same side. And then not only that, you kind of have to be honest with yourself that you can lay out these values and say, we are this, but do you actually live up to that, right?
Yes.
Because you can really screw yourself over by saying one thing, but if you act differently, so you really have to make sure that it aligns truly with how you operate and how everybody has to be on the same page in order for you to be successful in that.
We find when those things are clearly defined, your employees know how to show up for you and they're excited. They can start to really become brand ambassadors and they want to be your biggest cheerleaders. And that shines through in a really authentic way when they're interacting with your customers. We see it as a really powerful way to get alignment with your team and to help with what we were talking about earlier, that customer journey and making sure it feels really consistent for your buyers and
Mhm.
vendor partners, really anyone you interact with. Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I think Jeff Bezos said that. It's so true. It's so
Yeah.
true.
Yep, absolutely. So, Genevieve, I know we've touched on this already, but if you're a smaller builder, what's one thing you would work on, say, in the next quarter, given current market conditions, what is one thing that you're like, okay, we can really make a big difference if we do X?
Looking at storytelling. Are you telling a story that connects with your buyers, or are you listing features?
Mhm.
And making sure it ladders up to that core purpose, your business purpose. So I think auditing the customer journey is something that you can do with your own internal team. You don't have to pay someone else to do it. And then making sure that you have that unique voice and you're telling stories so that people can buy, like I said, a version of themselves that exists within your story. They get excited about interacting with you, and they're not just looking at product and specifications and features and pricing. Yeah, going a little deeper.
Yeah. So if somebody is like, okay, I think I need help on this, I want to check you guys out. So tell us, where can we learn more about Milesbrand? Where can we connect with you? And if you personally hang out on social somewhere, if somebody wanted to reach out to you as well.
Yes, anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can visit and learn more about Milesbrand and our process on milesbrand.com. I'd love to talk to anyone if it's about just brand auditing or to kick around ideas. It's what our team really loves to do, and it's a lot of fun to think through. So,
Awesome. Well, I will make it easy and link it all in the show notes so you guys can go straight to the show notes, check it out, and connect with Genevieve and check out Milesbrand if you need refresh or you're looking for some ideas for how to elevate your brand and really differentiate yourself from other builders in today's market. Genevieve, thank you so much for being a guest on today's show. I really appreciate your time. It was such a pleasure. I always love learning more about branding. It's something that I feel like it's an evolution. It's definitely not something that you do once and you're done, right? There's always different approaches, and it's interesting to see how different companies accomplish that. But it's really understanding better who you are as a company and telling the world about it so that they can hopefully say, hey, we're on the same page. I love that.
yeah,
And you'll get more customers because of that. So.
absolutely. Well, Anya, thank you so much for having me on today. And it was such a pleasure to talk about something that's so near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next time, you guys. Thanks so much for joining us. And until then, bye.